mean, he's one of the next 3-4 drivers being able to be the top star in Formula One, that's for sure. Yeah.
Alain Prost raced against nearly every great of Formula One's turbocharged era: Lauda, Senna, Villeneuve, Schumacher, and few tacticians in the sport's history read a race, a rival, or a car the way he did. But the drivers who shaped him weren't always his fiercest enemies. Some were the models he chased before he ever sat in a Grand Prix car. Some became friends he outlived. And one became the rival whose death changed how he spoke about racing for the rest of his life: Jackie Stewart.
As a driver, when you're in a team like this, especially with Ayrton, which is one of the best, been with. And
long before Alain Prost became known as the Professor, before the 4 world championships and the 51 Grand Prix wins that stood as a record for over a decade, he was a French teenager discovering Formula One for the first time. When he later spoke about who first drew him into the sport, he didn't hesitate. There were 2 names. Jackie Stewart was one of them, and Niki Lauda was the other. The 2 men Prost pointed to as his earliest models.
we are part of a fantastic environment with McLaren and Honda engine. And I mean, it's not only our fight, you have to think about also the other people working in the factory.
Long before either would become anything more personal to him than a name on television, Stewart's career had already reached its peak by the time Prost arrived in Formula One in 1980. 3 world championships between 1969 and 1973, a reputation built on precision rather than spectacle, and an approach to the sport that mirrored almost exactly the qualities Prost himself would later become famous for: smoothness, economy of effort, a refusal to waste energy on unnecessary risk. Where some drivers of that era treated every lap as a fight against the car, Stewart treated it as a conversation, coaxing speed out of precision rather than force. It was a philosophy Prost would spend his own career refining, whether he consciously borrowed it from Stewart or simply arrived at the same conclusions through his own instincts. What made Stewart significant to Prost wasn't shared competition. The two never raced against each other in anger. Stewart retired from Formula One in 1973, 7 years before Prost made his debut. Their connection existed instead in the way a student relates to a teacher he has never formally studied under, absorbing lessons secondhand through film, through reputation, through the way older drivers spoke about what came before. Prost grew up watching Stewart the way a young musician grows up listening to a record that shapes everything they later play, without ever meeting the artist who made it. Stewart's presence in Prost's story resurfaced decades later in small, almost incidental ways. When Prost first surpassed 30 Grand Prix wins during his career, it was Stewart who stood beside him, joking that Prost might one day reach 40, a number Prost in the moment dismissed as impossible. He went on to win 51. That the milestone was marked in Stewart's presence, rather than simply reported in the press, said something about how the relationship between the two men had evolved from one-sided admiration into genuine friendship, carried forward by two drivers from different eras who recognized the same instincts in each other. Gilles Villeneuve.
How do you rate him as a driver?
I mean, don't forget that he has done his first laps in Formula One with my car. I'm a big fan of Jensen. I mean, I think he's a very, very good driver.
By the early 1980s, Alain Prost was still establishing himself, first at McLaren and then at Renault, while Gilles Villeneuve had already become one of the most beloved drivers on the grid, a Ferrari star whose all-or-nothing style made him a favorite of fans who rarely understood how it made him among his fellow drivers. The two men were rivals in the most literal sense, wheel to wheel on circuits across Europe during the seasons that shaped Prost's early career. But rivalry, in Villeneuve's case, rarely stayed confined to the racetrack, and Prost was one of the drivers who came to know him best off it.
Together at the end of the year, I mean, try to improve the atmospheric engine, and it's good to have a good relation in the team.
What separated Villeneuve from nearly everyone else Prost competed against was the sheer scale of his commitment, applied without discrimination to every position on the grid. Prost later described it precisely: with most competitors, the only real battle was for pole position, since that was what carried weight in the championship. With Villeneuve, Prost said, "You would see a battle for everything, a fight for 10th place fought with the same intensity most drivers reserve for a win." It was, in Prost's telling, less a description of statistics than of temperament, a driver who treated every position on the track as worth defending to its absolute limit. That intensity extended into friendship in ways that surprised people who saw only the rivalry from the outside. During the difficult stretch of the 1982 season, after Didier Pironi's betrayal at Imola had shaken the normally easygoing Villeneuve, Prost was among the friends who noticed the anger simmering beneath the surface, alongside Jackie Stewart, both of them uneasy about where it might lead. Weeks earlier, after a serious accident had put a rival driver in a Heidelberg hospital, Prost and Villeneuve had traveled there together. Two Formula One drivers showing up unannounced at a reception desk late at night, simply because their friend needed to see familiar faces. It wasn't the kind of gesture rivals typically made for each other, but it was entirely consistent with how the paddock understood their relationship, competitive without being cold. Villeneuve was killed during qualifying at Zolder in May 1982, only weeks after that hospital visit, in the same tense stretch of the season that had left him carrying more anger than usual onto the track. His death reshaped how an entire generation of drivers thought about risk, safety, and the sport itself, and Prost was no exception. What Prost carried forward from Villeneuve wasn't a lesson in technique or a philosophy of racecraft the way Stewart or Lauda would later provide. It was something closer to a warning wrapped inside an example, proof of how far total commitment could take a driver, and proof delivered far too soon of exactly what it could cost. Niki Lauda.
They all looked at me. I said, why do you want to take Ayrton? I said, for the interest of the team, take Ayrton.
When Alain Prost joined McLaren for the 1984 season, he arrived as the fast, ambitious young Frenchman, replacing John Watson, stepping into a garage where Niki Lauda, already a two-time world champion, had no illusions about what the pairing meant. Lauda later admitted, with characteristic bluntness, that he hated the idea when he first heard about it, not out of any personal grudge, but because he understood immediately how fast Prost was and recognized exactly what kind of threat had just been placed in the other side of his own garage. It was, by Lauda's own account, the arrival of his biggest enemy on the same team. What followed defied the tension of that beginning. The two men spent 1984 locked in the tightest title fight Formula One had ever produced, Lauda edging Prost by half a point in the smallest championship margin in the sport's history. Rather than curdling into resentment, the closeness of that fight seemed to deepen the respect between them. Prost later called that period the most splendid and brilliant of his entire career, not simply because of the championships, Lauda's in 1984, his own in 1985, but because of the friendship that formed inside the rivalry, something Prost said mattered even more than the results themselves. Prost described Lauda as the old master to his eager young student, a two-time champion already carrying the authority of a legend when Prost joined the team. What Lauda taught him went beyond car setup or racecraft. It was Lauda who showed him how to separate the frustrations of a bad result from the rest of his life, how to compartmentalize disappointment instead of carrying it home. When Prost struggled after a difficult loss, Lauda taught him to get detached from it, even introducing him to his first whiskey in 1984 as a way of taking his mind off a race that hadn't gone his way. Prost referred to Lauda afterward as the idol of his youth, going back to the years when he first started karting, and Lauda's name was already one of the two he most admired. That admiration never faded with distance or time. When Lauda died in 2019, Prost's tribute carried the weight of nearly 4 decades of history between them, describing the loss not just of a champion, but of a gentleman, someone who had never complained about his condition, his accident, or anything else life had handed him, and who had gone on winning regardless. Prost called it an incredible shock, one that surprised him with how much stronger the feelings were than he had expected, a reminder that the bond forged in that McLaren garage had never really loosened, even decades after both men had left the cockpit behind. Michael Schumacher. By the time Michael Schumacher arrived in Formula One in 1991, Alain Prost's own career was entering its final stretch, the two men's paths overlapping for only a handful of seasons before Prost retired at the end of 1993. There was no long rivalry to speak of, no string of title fights the way there had been with Lauda or Senna. What there was instead was recognition, the unmistakable sense, even from a driver as accomplished as Prost, that something rare had just shown up on the grid. Prost watched Schumacher's early performances closely enough to notice something specific, a quality he was honest enough to admit he himself had never fully possessed. Schumacher could climb into an unfamiliar car and immediately drive it at the absolute limit, extracting maximum speed from the very first laps in a way that took most drivers, Prost included, considerably longer to achieve. Prost said so plainly, without the qualifications a lesser champion might have reached for. He wasn't able to drive every car at top speed straight away, he admitted, and in that specific respect, Schumacher was simply better than he had been. That kind of admission carried weight precisely because of who was making it. Prost had spent over a decade as the benchmark of the sport, holding the record for Grand Prix wins for years after his own retirement, a mark few expected to fall quickly. When Schumacher finally matched it in 2001, equaling Prost's total of 51 victories at the Hungarian Grand Prix, Prost was there in person, posing for a photograph alongside the McLaren mechanics and a sign marking the achievement, a scene he later admitted had left him strangely moved, both proud and a little embarrassed to watch someone catch up to a number he had once assumed was untouchable. Prost's respect for Schumacher extended well past that single race. He predicted accurately that Schumacher had the talent, discipline, and motivation to keep climbing far past his own total, suggesting the German could eventually reach 60 or 70 wins before his career ended. He was equally direct about what separated Schumacher's era from his own, noting that Prost had spent his championship years fighting drivers like Lauda, Mansell, Piquet, and Senna, while Schumacher's toughest competition largely disappeared after Senna's death in 1994. An observation offered not to diminish Schumacher, but simply to be honest about the different landscapes each man had raced through. Years later, Prost came close to becoming Schumacher's teammate at Ferrari, discussing a possible return in the mid-1990s on the explicit understanding that he would serve as the team's clear number 2. The deal never happened, but the willingness to consider it said something on its own. A four-time champion, already retired, prepared to step back into a supporting role simply to be close to a driver he had already concluded was operating on another level entirely. Ayrton Senna. No rivalry defined Alain Prost's career the way his years alongside and against Ayrton Senna did, and no relationship in Formula One history carried more contradiction packed into it. They were teammates at McLaren in 1988 and 1989, partners who combined to win 15 of 16 races in their first season together, a level of dominance no pairing has matched since. They were also, within those same 2 years, the center of two of the most controversial championship deciders the sport had ever seen, both settled by collisions between them at Suzuka, first in Prost's favor in 1989, then in Senna's in 1990. The bitterness of those years was real and well documented. Accusations traded through the press, a partnership that curdled into open hostility by the time Prost left for Ferrari in 1990. But statistics alone told only part of the story. Across 142 races run against each other, Prost's win ratio in their head-to-head meetings was actually slightly higher than Senna's, a fact that undercut the narrative, popular at the time, that Prost had simply been the calculating tactician standing in the way of a faster man. It was Prost's speed, deceptive because it looked so unhurried, that pushed Senna to the outer edge of his own ability, and it was Prost who beat him on equal terms more consistently than any other rival Senna ever faced. Time did what neither man's career could. After Prost retired in 1993, the animosity between them began to soften into something neither had expected. Senna called him often in the years that followed, sometimes twice a week, a habit he had never had while the two were still competing against each other. Prost later said he sensed something had shifted in Senna after his own retirement, as though Prost's presence on the grid had quietly served as motivation that Senna hadn't fully recognized until it was gone. He described Senna as having lost his bearings without him, a strange thing to say about a three-time champion still adding to his own legend, but one that reflected just how entangled the two men's careers had become. The full weight of that transformation arrived only after Senna's death at Imola in 1994. In his final days, Senna had told people close to him to pass along a message to Prost that he missed him. Prost, hearing it, spoke afterward not as a rival, relieved to have outlasted his greatest threat, but as a man mourning someone he had spent a decade defining himself against, and in the end, had come to understand better than almost anyone else in the sport. He called their shared story an incredible human and psychological journey, one he chose to remember by holding on to its most beautiful moments rather than its bitterest ones. Juan Manuel Fangio. Alain Prost never raced against Juan Manuel Fangio. By the time Prost made his Formula One debut with McLaren in 1980, Fangio had been retired for more than 2 decades. His fifth and final world championship, already 22 years in the past, won in 1957 at the age of 46. There was no shared grid, no rivalry built through direct competition, nothing Prost could point to from memory the way he could with Lauda, Senna, or Villeneuve, And yet Fangio's name kept surfacing throughout Prost's career, not as a rival to be measured against, but as the standard every subsequent great was quietly compared to, whether they wanted the comparison or not. The numbers explain why the comparison never faded. Fangio's 5 world championships stood alone at the top of the record books for decades, unmatched by anyone until Prost himself became only the second driver in history to reach 4 titles in 1993, a milestone that placed his own name permanently beside Fangio's in the sport's history. One step below him, in the company reporters and historians reached for whenever they needed a benchmark for true greatness. When Michael Schumacher passed Prost's win total years later, and when Lewis Hamilton eventually passed Schumacher's championship count decades after that, the conversation inevitably circled back to the same question journalists had been asking since the 1950s. Whether anyone, statistically dominant or not, could really be measured against what Fangio had done, racing 6 or 8 times a year across 4 different manufacturers, in cars built with none of the safety modern drivers take for granted. Prost's own regard for Fangio went beyond passive comparison. He appeared as one of the featured voices in A Life of Speed, the Juan Manuel Fangio story, a 2020 documentary built around interviews with the champions who came after him. Prost included, alongside Jackie Stewart, both invited specifically because of the weight their own careers carried when speaking about what Fangio represented. It was a rare thing for 2 multiple world champions to sit for a film built entirely around a driver neither of them had ever raced. And it said something about how far Fangio's shadow extended that both agreed to do it. What Fangio offered Prost wasn't a lesson delivered directly, the way Lauda's mentorship or Stewart's example had been. It was something closer to a ceiling, proof that a driver could combine calculation with speed, patience with dominance, and do it across an era so different from Prost's own that direct comparison became almost beside the point. Prost's career was defined by economics, by knowing exactly how much risk a result required and refusing to spend more than that. Fangio, racing in cars with none of the safety Prost's generation inherited, had built the same reputation for precision, under circumstances that made precision itself a matter of survival. Prost never got to test himself against that standard directly, and by every account, he understood the difference between inheriting a discipline and building it. Fangio built it first, in conditions that punished any driver who got it wrong. Prost inherited it, refined it, and spent his career trying to prove himself worthy of the comparison, a debt he seemed to acknowledge decades later, simply by showing up to talk about the man who set the terms before Prost ever had a say in it. Unlike Gurney's list, built from admiration offered across distance and decades, Prost's 5 collided with him directly, on track, in championship battles, inside the same garage, sometimes in the same corner at the same moment. Stewart gave him a template before he ever raced. Villeneuve gave him a warning wrapped in friendship. Lauda gave him a second education in how to carry himself. Schumacher gave him an honest measure of his own limits. And Senna, in the end, gave him the one thing none of the others could, a rivalry so complete that even death couldn't fully close it, only soften it into something closer to grief.